Hello and welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. My name is Megan Wynn, and I'm the Community Events Manager at the Peninsula Open Space Trust, and I'll be your host for tonight. You're watching Coexisting with Coyotes, Behavior, Balance, and Safety in the Bay Area, hosted by Post, featuring special guest, conservation scientist, and carnivore ecologist Dr. Christine Wilkinson, who has been on our show before. I know many of you tuning in tonight are concerned pet owners, parents, and curious wildlife enthusiasts. And while coyotes can be a complex topic, we're excited to hear from our expert speaker who will help us separate fact from fiction. Regardless of your feelings about coyotes, tonight we'll explore the science, history, and behaviors that can help us find balance and safe coexistence strategies in our shared landscape. Tonight's 75-minute presentation will be interactive, and we encourage your participation. To ask questions in the live chat, please log into YouTube so we can address your questions at the end. And for the best viewing experience, you can watch directly on YouTube or click the full screen button on the bottom right corner of the video player if you're watching on the Post website. And the recording will also be available on YouTube immediately after the event, and we'll email you the link. We're also excited to share that we have added live captioning as a feature. If you're watching live tonight and need captions, you can click the link in the YouTube chat or description to open a separate window containing the captions. And if you're watching on the Post website, the captions will appear below the video player like so. And please note that a short delay in captioning is normal. And thank you for your understanding as we work to make our events more accessible for all. Please follow the community chat guidelines so that we can create a positive and inclusive environment. Please be kind, no harmful speech, foster constructive discussions, no spam or self-promo, and we reserve the right to remove comments. Thank you for everybody's participation in making this a family-friendly event and discussion. And for those of you who are new to Post work, we're a nonprofit land trust, and our mission is to protect open spaces on the Peninsula and South Bay for the benefit of all. We are creating a network of protected lands where people and nature connect and thrive. And since 1977, Post has protected over 90,000 acres of land. That's thanks to all our donors and viewers like you who support us. Here's a short 30-second video on what we do.
Since our founding in 1977, Post and our partners have preserved the Peninsula and South Bay's sweeping landscapes.
These are the places we know and love.
Places that wildlife call home.
Places we rely on for food, fresh air, clean water, and our health.
We're just getting started. Post protects nature because nature sustains us. Nature connects us all.
You can learn more about Post on our website at openspacetrust.org, and we host many free events every month, as well as share free resources like our hiking guides if you're looking for places to go on the South Bay and Peninsula. Before we dive into the program tonight, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement and invite you to share what native land you are currently occupying and tuning in from today. The land and Post working area includes the territories of the Amamutsin, Muwekma Ohlone, Ramaytush Ohlone, Tamia Nation, as well as other Native organizations and individuals who are descended from the first people of this land. These lands have been home to many Native tribes since time immemorial, and whose people are still with us today. I want to acknowledge the land itself, including the Santa Cruz and Diablo Mountains, the San Francisco Bay, and the Pacific Ocean, as well as the watersheds and ecosystems that make up this landscape we call our home. So I'm seeing some folks. Go ahead and type in the chat as you're able to log into YouTube, and we can see your comments directly. Let this moment serve as a reminder that as residents of these places, we have a responsibility to be caretakers of our shared home and neighbors, including wildlife. All right, folks, I have a surprise, fun, interactive activity for us. If you're new around here, it's time to play the Coyote Pop Quiz Game Show. All right, folks, who's ready to play the Coyote Pop Quiz Game Show? Here's how it's going to work. You'll need your phone or you to scan this QR code, or you can open up a new tab on your laptop by clicking the link in the chat here. And you can also follow along in the online in the YouTube chat, or you could just speak out loud. That's all good. You don't have to log in. Participation is optional, and it's just a fun way for everybody to get involved, interactive, and it's a good way for all of us to prime our learning, see what we know about coyotes before we dive into the main progress. Okay, look at that. I'm already seeing at least 7 of you guys tuning in. I'll wait for a few more, and if you're watching the recording, feel free to play along as well. And feel free to skip towards the answers. Okay, here we go. You can join in at any time, but I'm going to keep us moving so that we can get through our event tonight. Here we go. First question. Are coyotes naturally more active during the day, or are they naturally more active at night? Is the answer day? At night, both day and night, or dusk? Okay, lock in those answers. I'm seeing a lot of divisive answers here. We're all mixed. Okay, both day and night is winning. I'm going to wait a few more seconds for folks to lock in those answers. And here we go. Ready? And boom. The answer is both day and night. Very good. Most of you guys got that right. Coyotes are naturally active both day and night and can be flexible depending on their context. This is called being ephemeral. All right, question number 2. Which country logged their first official record of an urban coyote in 2023? Is it Canada, Mexico, USA, or Panama? Go ahead and lock in those answers once you go ahead and see that on your screens, on your phones. And if you're on YouTube, feel free to type in the chat so we can see your comments come through as well. Here we go here. All right, I'm seeing Canada, Mexico, USA, Panama. Panama is winning right now. What about Canada? And then we got USA, Mexico's last. A few more seconds for folks to lock in those answers. And here we go. Okay, 3, 2, 1. And the answer is Mexico. Oh, a lot of us missed that one. That's okay. We'll learn a lot because Mexico logged their first official record of urban coyotes in 2023, specifically in Villahermosa, Tabasco, where a female coyote was documented through sightings and photographs in April and May. Wow, we tripped you guys up on that one, but that's okay. We're going to learn so much more. All right, question number 3. What species are coyotes most closely related to? Is it the gray wolf? Is it the black-backed jackal? Is it the red fox? Or is it the crab-eating fox? Okay, we got a tie almost, okay, with gray wolf and red fox, but gray wolf is pulling ahead. Take a look at this picture to the left here. Are you getting, what kind of species are we seeing resemblance to? Possibly could be a hint here. I'm waiting for a few more of you guys to lock in those answers. Go ahead and do that. Here we go. A few more seconds. And number 1 answer being gray wolf. And if you answered gray wolf, you would be correct. Good job. 46 of you guys got that answer right. Gray wolf. Both coyotes and gray wolves evolved from the same ancestral line of early small canids during the Pliocene and early Pleistocene periods, with their evolutionary line separating approximately about 1.5 million years ago. While they share this common ancestry with the Canidae family alongside dogs, jackals, and foxes, the close evolutionary relationship between wolves and coyotes explains many of their similar behaviors and ecological roles as adaptable predators in North American ecosystems. I can't wait for Dr. Christine to tell us more about the history of coyotes. Okay, a few more questions left. Here we go. As of June 2022, approximately what percentage of human-coyote conflict instances in San Francisco involve dogs? Is it 22%, 79%, 36%, or 52%? Here we go here. Lock in those answers and see how we're feeling here. Okay, I'm seeing number 1 answer, 79%. Number 2 answer, 52%. Gonna wait for a few more folks to lock in those answers. And we're gonna find out in a few seconds here. Okay, if you locked in the answer, 79%, you would be correct. Good job, folks. Dogs were involved in nearly 8 out of 10 coyote conflicts, according to Dr. Wilkinson's decade-long study of San Francisco coyote reports. The second most common conflict type involved adult humans in 22% of cases, and the third most common conflict involved cats in about 8%. Very good. Okay, almost done here. Which of the following food items will coyotes eat? Is it snakes, trash, whales, or all of the above? All right, immediate answer out of the gate, all of the above. I don't know, y'all. I've seen some coyotes digging through some trash. I know they're also carnivores. Maybe they eat some things. So we'll see here. What do you guys think? Lock in those answers. We're going to wait a few more seconds. And here we go. Okay, there's a clear winner here. And if you answered all of the above, you would be very correct. Good job, team. Many people believe that urban coyotes primarily eat garbage and pets, and although coyotes are predators, they are also opportunistic and shift their diets to take advantage of the most available prey. Coyotes are generally scavengers and predators of small prey, but can shift to large prey occasionally, and the most common food item for coyotes is small rodents. Okay, very good, everybody. Congratulations, thanks for playing. And thank you, Dr. Christine, for these questions and answers. And good job, everybody. You all did so well. I hope that this primed you all for our event tonight. And I've kept you long waiting enough. So let me hop off the game show stage here and get back to our program. Here we go. Okay. Let me introduce you to our speaker tonight. Dr. Christine Wilkinson is a conservation scientist, carnivore ecologist, and science communicator at UC Santa Cruz and the California Academy of Sciences, and the incoming assistant curator of community science at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. Her work focuses on the social ecological drivers of human-wildlife interactions and how our relationships with nature are underpinned by environmental justice. Let's bring in Dr. Christine to the stage. Hey, Dr. Christine.
How's it going?
Hey, so excited to have you join us. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing so great. Excited to learn more about coyotes from you. And for those of you who are meeting you for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Why are you passionate about coyotes?
Yeah, so I'm a conservation scientist. I work a lot on the relationships that we have with wildlife and with nature. And there is so much to unpack with our relationships with coyotes. I think a lot about these misunderstood, resilient animals and how people feel about them and kind of where the people are coming from as well. And it's just a great topic to work on for that kind of thing.
Excellent. Well, I can't wait to hear about your expert opinions and walk us through the history, the science, all of it. Can you tell us a little bit about what you'll talk about today? Give us a little sneak peek.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of a whirlwind. We're going to do an overview. We're going to have the history of coyotes on this continent. We're going to talk about the ecology and behavior of coyotes, the basics. We're going to talk about coexistence, and then we're going to end with some myth busting because myths are really, really common for this species.
All right. Well, that sounds all exciting. I think our audience is excited and ready to hear from you. So a reminder to our live audience, if you want to participate in the chat, you'll need to log into YouTube and ask your questions, and we'll bring them up later during the Q&A session. All right, Dr. Christine, let's get your slides up. Take it away.
Great. Thanks so much. So I think we should just jump in, and I hope y'all are logged into YouTube so you can participate in the chat. So I want y'all to type in the chat, how many of y'all have seen a coyote in the last year? And was that last coyote you saw in an urban area, a rural area, or a suburban area? We're going to see if I can actually see this chat going on. But if not, I'm not sure. It seems like maybe the chat's a little bit broken. Think about where you've seen that coyote. I'm sure that you all have varied answers. Talk to your friends if you're with your friends right now, if you've seen a coyote in these different places. So all over this continent, coyotes have been getting a ton of press for lounging on our deck furniture, chilling out in grocery store fridges, and even riding our public transit. So it's safe to say they are simply ubiquitous, from urban to rural locations and everything in between. And it's an understatement to say that coyotes are polarizing as heck. Okay, so people have so many different concerns, feelings, and gosh, so many opinions about coyotes. But whether we like it or not, coyotes have shown us they are resilient and they are here to stay. So today I'm going to teach you some of the basics about coyote ecology and behavior. I'm going to discuss some of the research and management being done across California. We're going to bust some myths, and I'm going to leave you with a toolkit of best practices for coexistence. But first, who the heck am I anyway? Before jumping into coyotes, I really want to give you just a little background about me, especially since all of our life experiences truly do shape how we interact with and view nature, especially when it comes to controversial species like the coyote. So I spent my childhood in Queens, New York, and my biggest exposure to animals was actually through the Bronx Zoo. That's me on the left in that picture. I was so cute. We would go to the zoo's free day every Wednesday during the summer, but I also loved urban wildlife. I was basically running around Queens pretending to be the David Attenborough of Queens, looking for squirrels, cockroaches, hornets, pigeons, you name it. I was particularly fond of the rats, which I call New York's puppies since they're so big. And I remember kind of being entranced just watching them in the subway. But it was only later in life I realized that I'd actually wanted to maybe be a non-human animal when I was a kid. I remember actually saying I wanted to grow up to be a lion. I even pretended to be a dog for several months in third grade, like down on the floor during class and everything. My poor teacher, bless her heart. But even though I was and remain clearly a bit of a weirdo, I think baby Christine was onto something. Coming from a slightly poorer background with some dysfunction in my family and looking to urban nature as a little bit of an escape, I think in some ways I really related to the resilience of many species. So I don't think it's a coincidence that I ended up focusing a lot of my career on misunderstood resilient animals in urban spaces and beyond. But of course, I learned pretty early on in my career that wildlife conservation and coexistence need people. Local communities are the most impacted by sharing landscapes with wildlife. So communities need to be at the forefront of coexistence solutions. So I've basically spent the last 15 plus years devoting my life to working on human-wildlife coexistence across urban to rural landscapes around the world. And that really requires me to essentially be an interspecies ambassador. And one thing that's true across all the contexts I work in is that when it comes to coexisting with wildlife, knowledge is power. So let's start with some basics about coyotes to get you equipped with some of that power.
Hey, Dr. Christine, sorry for the interruption. Just want to let our live audience know that we fixed the live chat. So if folks want to hit refresh, the live chat will be back there. And we can see everybody's lovely participation and comments to your question earlier. Okay, back to you.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, if you weren't able to answer the question earlier about when you last saw a coyote and where it was, please do so now. We're super curious. So let's walk through coyote behavior and natural history 101. So first question, are coyotes new to California or to the Bay Area more specifically? And the answer is nope. So as you can see from this 2018 study, museum specimens are able to show us that coyotes have been here in California for thousands of years. But we don't need the specimens to show us that because the indigenous communities can confirm this. The word coyote, or coyote, as some of y'all say, I don't want to leave the coyote folks out, comes from the Spanish word coyote, el coyote, which has its roots in the language of the Nahua people, who were Aztecs of central Mexico. In Nahuatl, the coyote was referred to as coyotl. And there are a lot of indigenous stories that include coyotes. For example, there's Huehuecoyotl, an Aztec deity whose name means very old coyote. And Huehuecoyotl was known as the god of music, mischief, song, and dance, as well as a prankster with benevolent tendencies, really showing these undertones of respect for the coyote's wit and intelligence. And here in the Bay Area, within the Ohlone mythology, coyote was a supreme being who was the ancestor of all humanity. So a lot of respect for the coyote from indigenous communities throughout history. But of course, European colonizers had a different idea about coyotes. So on the left, we have a picture of wolf pelts. In this country, European colonizers tried and to a large degree succeeded in killing off the wolf. But as a result, we got lots of coyotes moving into new habitats without the threat of the wolf. So then people started getting rid of coyotes too, which is the picture on the right. And this continues to this day with, in many states, coyotes being classified as vermin, people being able to shoot them on sight, including our infamous controversial coyote killing contests in the USA, which as you'll see, really don't accomplish what they profess to accomplish. Because, as I said, coyotes are here to stay. So to show you what the coyote range expansion looked like, again, from that 2018 study, you can see coyotes lived across much of the west and even central part of the continent in 1900, and then expanded that range dramatically all the way around the whole United States and new parts of Canada, new parts of Central America, as the populations of larger carnivores were reduced. So now in the USA, we have coyotes from coast to coast. They're cosmopolitan. And the Bay Area didn't escape the nation's history of coyote eradication. For example, in Marin County, poison, snares, traps, and shooting led to coyotes being eradicated by the late 1930s. And in San Francisco, the last coyote was seen in Golden Gate Park in 1925. But then a few different things happened, including Proposition 4 that was passed in California in the late 90s. And that basically banned a lot of these poisons, as well as some types of trapping. And this effort was fueled by animal rights activists and by folks having considerable concerns about poisoning of non-target species from these poisons. So once the wholesale eradication of the early 1900s started to die down and that legislation was passed, coyotes started to recover. So in Marin, they started to come back sometime in the 80s, likely coming down from Sonoma, where they hadn't fully been eradicated. And in San Francisco, the first coyote was spotted in the early 2000s in the Presidio. Now, according to genetic work by Professor Ben Sachs's lab at UC Davis, out of the 4 distinct genetic clusters in the region that you can see color-coded here, San Francisco's coyotes are most closely related to the Marin populations. But how did they get here? Let's do a little soft launch into myth busting to clear up some things. So, how did coyotes get to San Francisco? Did they swim to San Francisco? Unlikely. That area of water under the Golden Gate Bridge is really not to be trifled with. Those currents can be rough, volatile, probably not great for any of us to try to swim across, people or coyotes. But don't get me wrong, coyotes can swim. They swam to Angel Island, where you can see them today, hear them today, coming from the north across a calmer body of water and smaller distance. And they've been seen in other places as well, including other cities. Okay, next up, there's a persistent rumor going around that a disgruntled trapper or a rehabber with a lot of extra time brought several coyotes to the Presidio, maybe even from Mendocino, to seed the population. But that's also unlikely. According to Professor Ben Sachs and team, who captured and did the genetic analysis on one of the first coyotes seen in the Presidio, along with San Francisco coyotes being most closely related to the Marin population, the coyote they captured also had no apparent injuries. So it wasn't a rehabbed coyote. They also asked around to the other rehabbers, kind of seeing, did anyone do this? Nothing. And as far as the trapper theory, we know from the genetics that these coyotes are not genetically likely to be from Mendocino. Okay, so did they cross the Golden Gate Bridge? Ding, 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 ding. The answer is probably. The coyote whose genome was sequenced in this paper had a 99.5% probability that he came from the Marin population. And back in the early aughts, there was at least one video of a coyote crossing the Golden Gate Bridge. Please, if anyone has access to this video, send it my way. I have no idea where to find it. And the other thing that makes them most likely to have come from the north rather than the south is simply because the southern coyote population was much farther away from the noise, much farther away than the northern population was at the time. Okay, so speaking of genetics, what's up with coyote genetics anyway? Maybe you've heard about all of these hybrids, coy dogs, coy wolves, even dog odies. Are any of these even real? Well, it's complicated, but the short answer is kind of yes, they are. So it turns out on the eastern side of North America, hybrids between dogs, wolves, and coyotes are not only real, but pretty common. Coyote-wolf hybrids goes back to what I told you earlier about the wolves being hunted so heavily by people and the coyotes moving east. So they were sometimes forced to hybridize with one another if there wasn't another mate around from their species. Meanwhile, as coyotes were moving east, they also sometimes bred with dogs. They still sometimes do today. And wolves can also hybridize with dogs. So it can be a big melting pot. And today, coyotes in the east have lots of different genetic mixes, although it's still mostly coyote genes. The eastern coyotes are bigger and heavier than western coyotes, and you can really see that distinct difference in this image from Project Coyote. But they can do all this stuff. They can go all these places. How are coyotes able to be so ubiquitous? they seem kind of like superheroes that can do anything, right? Well, the answer to how they can do all this stuff is behavioral flexibility. Being behaviorally flexible basically means coyotes can change their behaviors in order to survive in lots of different environments and circumstances. So what are some examples of coyote behavioral flexibility? First, coyotes are generalists. They can eat kind of anything, as you saw from that quiz. For example, my colleague, Dr. Tali Caspi, who was based at UC Davis and is now a postdoc at UC Berkeley, did this fantastic study on the diet of San Francisco's coyote population using scat, which is poop, for those of you who are wondering. Love being able to bring poop into a talk. So she and her collaborators picked up a bunch of coyote poo for years. Isn't science glamorous? And they found that San Francisco's coyotes eat everything from small rodents to reptiles to human food. She even found whale in the scat from when a whale had washed up on the beach and a coyote had scavenged it. On that note, my colleague Frankie Garrity at UC Santa Cruz studies coyotes eating seal pups up and down the California coast, which opens up fascinating questions about marine to terrestrial nutrient flow. They've also been seen snacking on grapes and avocados and even hunting deer in some places. You name it, they can probably eat it. So the other thing that makes them behaviorally flexible of many is that they are really good at problem solving. Do I have any puzzle fanatics out there? Type in the chat if you love puzzles. I definitely love a 1,000-piece puzzle when I have the time. Who has the time these days? So scientists have actually tested coyotes on problem solving with puzzle boxes, like my colleague Dr. Julie Young and her team did in this study shown here. And the coyotes are really good at it. They can use their muzzle or their paws or both. And as one last example of behavioral flexibility, coyotes exhibit what's called fission-fusion behavior. So they're highly social, and they do tend to live in packs with a particular social structure, like always only having one breeding pair per pack. But they can also hunt, forage, and generally move around solo or in pairs or in groups at any given time. And all of these examples of behavioral flexibility that I've described allow coyotes to be super adaptive to various contexts. So even though there's a lot of complexity in how they can behave and survive, coyotes actually do have pretty stable life cycle timelines here in California. So a year through the eyes of a coyote in California looks something like December through February or March. They're getting jiggy with it for mating season, figuring out how to settle down and have some puppies. From there on, they're giving birth and raising pups through much of the summer, from the spring through the summer. And finally, if juveniles are going to disperse, which is dependent on a lot of different things, it's going to be in the fall. And as I'll explain, these seasons of their life cycle are really important for dictating conflict and coexistence and how they move through these shared landscapes. So let's jump into how coyotes navigate shared landscapes by looking at the ultimate example of a shared landscape, cities. But first, let's step back a bit to wrap our heads around this a little bit. So even though we know that coyotes can obviously make it work in cities, cities are not always easy to navigate for people or for wildlife. And shared landscapes in general are so complex. This is so much information just to really push that complexity your way. We know that our interactions with wildlife have a mixture of complex societal and ecological drivers, whether or not these interactions happen in cities. And these social ecological drivers often have deep historical roots linked to human culture and politics and systemic biases like racism and classism. For example, this figure from a study by Rahima White and colleagues here on the right is essentially saying animal behavior and ecology don't give us enough information to prevent and reduce conservation-related conflicts. To foster coexistence, we really need to understand the societal structures, economic components, and even people's perceptions. And on top of that, we know that human and wildlife well-being are deeply intertwined, a reality emphasized by concepts like One Health, which describes the interconnectedness of human, animal, and environmental health. So here's a figure from a paper we recently published that describes the intersecting health-related causes and consequences of human-wildlife interactions. And I just want to make a note that it's not all negative. People and wildlife can gain well-being from interacting with one another as well in safe ways. So with that in mind, a huge part of the work that I do involves figuring out how coyotes and other behaviorally flexible, misunderstood wildlife species are navigating these complex anthropogenic landscapes full of disamenities that we've created on the landscape, and then seeing how these animals are also managing to live alongside us. And these anthropogenic disamenities, like linear infrastructure and pollutants, are not just inequitably distributed and linked to environmental injustices, but can have really nuanced, not always explicitly negative effects on wildlife physiology, behavior, space use, and survival. So while Wile E. Coyote here in the bottom left might be rightfully anxious for crossing that railroad, it's not necessarily always that way. Sometimes animals actually use these parts of the landscape for things. So in the words of my dear Jeff Goldblum, we know that life finds a way, but how it does so and what kinds of stressors are faced along the way requires integrating data about ecology and animal behavior with data about anthropogenic burdens and designs, whether or not we're talking about coyotes. So how do we do this? There are a lot of ways, but in my research, I rely a lot on the trifecta of motion sense camera traps, like this one that I have right here, GPS collars, and community-based science or community science. And we're going to only get into these last two today, but I wanted to give you a rundown. So we use motion sense camera traps as a non-invasive way to see what coyotes and other animals are up to in these shared landscapes. We use GPS collars to get a fine-scale sense of how coyotes and other wildlife are living alongside us and responding to our activities. And we use community science since, as I mentioned earlier, local communities are the ultimate holders and creators of knowledge, as well as critical leaders for what coexistence looks like. So to understand how coyotes are navigating the most intensely shared landscapes with us, we did a study in Los Angeles, which we're hoping to eventually build upon in the Bay Area, looking at urban coyote movement in relation to societal and ecological features across the city. And if you're wondering, that little tiny collar is indeed a coyote collar. Before I launch into what we found, we have to take a side detour into how we catch coyotes to put collars on them, because I know that y'all are curious. So there are a number of different ethical traps we can use. I won't get into the trap types, but in general, we also need to figure out how to get coyotes into the area so that they can find the traps. So for instance, some traps require bait, and every trapper will swear by their bait. This one in the lower right is a stinky meat mixture made for a trap called a collarum. Then we need a lure to get coyotes curious about the space. So here's an example of a lure called deception. But again, lots of people have lures that they swear by. And we put this lure out on a stick or a branch raised off the ground a little bit to catch the wind and bring the coyotes in. And my personal favorite, each and every one of you in the audience right now can go on the internet and buy your very own bottle of concentrated coyote urine. Enjoy. You're welcome. We can sprinkle urine near the trap to get coyotes curious about the immediate area. And finally, if you're really, really lucky and you know a trapper named Jimmy from Mississippi who chews tobacco and the whole works, who'll be good at using a special tool to make coyote calls and prey calls to bring coyotes into the area. So in the audio I'm going to play, which hopefully we can hear, Jimmy is going to be making the sound of a cottontail in distress. Okay, so, oh, he's still going. You get the idea. So that cottontail in distress sound was so effective that we actually had an owl swoop down onto our heads while this was happening. It was kind of scary. And then, of course, we released them back into the city. So this is in Irvine when we were capturing some coyotes a few years ago. So let's jump into what we were looking for in our Los Angeles study. First, we were asking whether coyote movement models that integrated societal features and ecological features were better at predicting coyote habitat selection than the models that just looked at ecological features. So we used data sets on 14 different societal, linear infrastructure, and ecological features. For example, flood channels, a type of linear infrastructure that coyotes had been anecdotally seen using in Los Angeles. As an example of ecological features, we have vegetation greenness as an indicator of high quality habitat, and then societal features like median income, which can be indicative of what's called the luxury effect, higher quality habitat in higher income areas. since habitat might not always be captured by vegetation greenness in arid regions like LA. And long story short, we found that movement models that included societal features outperformed those without societal features. So basically, what humans are doing in these urban landscapes is really important for predicting coyote habitat selection, and maybe even more important than the ecology alone. We also looked at the effects of anthropogenic burden. By more burdened, I mean coyotes with home ranges, so they're kind of where they live, in regions of higher pollution burden, higher human population densities, and higher development intensity, as well as lower median income. And we found that the more burdened coyotes have larger home ranges, longer step lengths, which are distances between consecutive GPS points, and greater mean daily displacement, which I've included in this chart. And in this chart, you can see that the purple are the more burdened coyotes and the blue are the less burdened coyotes. And that metric, mean daily displacement, is basically a measure of how far an animal ends up from where it started each day. It's a reflection of the net distance traveled. So all of these metrics together show us that more burdened coyotes are traveling faster and farther, which could mean that they're having to use more energy to get what they need. We also found that coyotes experiencing different levels of burden selected for resources differently. I'm going to give you just two examples because we did a ton of work on this. So first example, coyotes experiencing higher human population density selected more strongly for railways, perhaps relying on them for ease of movement. So this is the distance to the railway, and that you can see the higher human population density, that purple one, is further over, meaning they stay close to the railways. So they're really needing to move through these complex landscapes in innovative ways. And coyotes in wealthier areas paradoxically selected against the wealthiest parts of their home ranges, which could be because, according to some other studies, people in wealthier areas are more likely to have negative views toward coyotes and have the resources to request lethal removal, which can be a really expensive process. Finally, for this study, we saw that these more burdened coyotes in Los Angeles, again in the purple compared to the blue, selected more strongly for city parks, likely because of persistent anthropogenic resources like trash and the rodents that are attracted to that trash. In contrast, coyotes in our study more broadly were not selecting for other types of urban green spaces like cemeteries and golf courses, these really nice big ones, right? Even though those types of green spaces are supposed to be important for urban wildlife. Now, we think this discrepancy is because cemeteries and golf courses are really well maintained. They have this routine trimming of vegetation and routine cleaning up of things on the landscape. So they don't have the same readily available anthropogenic resources that the city parks might be giving to these coyotes. So to sum it up, in our LA study about movement, we saw that systemic inequities and societal well-being predict urban coyote movement and habitat selection. And the more burdened coyotes might be expending more energy to get the resources they need. And I think that integrating movement ecology studies like this, kind of bringing together societal aspects with ecological aspects for coyotes and other species, basing your studies in a One Health paradigm, so really thinking about the links between human, wildlife, and environmental well-being, can potentially contribute to the design and redesign of more equitable shared landscapes for both us and wildlife. What about the Bay Area? So we hope to scale up studies like these across regions, including here in the Bay Area. A few years ago, our colleagues at the Presidio Trust and National Park Service piloted a project to monitor coyotes using GPS collars, and I made this animation from the data. You'll notice these data are from October 2016, and what happens in the fall? There you go, dispersal, right? The orange one is dispersing, trying to disperse very far south. And that is a long way to go. And the Highway 280 poses a ton of challenges for these dispersing coyotes. There's actually a big uptick in coyotes struck by cars during the dispersal season in the Bay Area and otherwise. So with movement data like these, we hope to eventually get a more comprehensive and more scalable idea of how coyotes navigate these complex shared landscapes full of risks and rewards, including how they're threading the needle through our highly varied attitudes toward them. So with that in mind, let's switch over to some of the work I've led on human-coyote interactions here in the Bay. So I've mentioned that coyotes and people navigate the same systemically based challenges. Well, it follows that human-coyote interactions can also be rooted in issues of environmental and social justice. And I think that an ideal way we can distill all of these complex factors that link justice and human-wildlife interactions is by telling you a story about a very famous urban coyote named Carl. Now, this is Carl's urn, which lives in the offices at San Francisco Animal Care and Control. And here's Carl. Here he is walking through Golden Gate Park in the middle of the day. This video was sent in by the public. And you can see that people have very different reactions to him, mostly none at all. There's going to be a woman that's reading what looks like is a very good book coming into the frame. There it is. Got to be a good book, right? She has no clue. But for those of you who know canid behavior, you'll recognize this as stalking behavior. And Carl's goal is to actually stalk and try to get a toddler coming into the frame at the end of the video. Now, fortunately, Carl did not successfully make contact with any toddlers, but he showed this unusually bold predatory behavior toward toddlers often enough that he needed to be lethally removed by the authorities that year, back in 2021. But Carl's story runs a lot deeper than that. Before he started showing these behaviors, Carl was living in a nearby park, being illegally hand-fed for years by a woman suffering from homelessness. The systems had failed her. She had no housing, no mental health care services, and was looking for companionship, just like anyone might, right? So when she passed away, Carl, having received these continuous rewards from people, we think that's what helped develop these bold behaviors. So, and then he came over to Golden Gate Park, started showing these behaviors. So all of these negative components, these negative consequences can be linked back to the systemic injustices of which that woman was a victim. So understanding these systemic challenges and how community members are interacting with coyotes is absolutely critical for preventing and addressing human-coyote conflict. Now, fortunately, San Francisco Animal Care and Control has an impressive community-based coyote sightings database that's been up and running for over a decade and helps the agency to monitor and respond to coyote conflicts in real time. Now, in this case, conflicts are anything from someone's cat being eaten by a coyote to a coyote persistently following someone on the street, which can be really scary for people, but those perceptions are also really important. So I've been partnering with SFACC to see how I can be helpful by using their data to better understand and be able to predict human-coyote conflict reports and their drivers. Before we jump into the main results, I wanted to show you this really important comparison to wrap your head around community-based science and what we can learn from it. So on the left, we have coyote records from iNaturalist, a freely available biodiversity logging app. And on the right are SFACC's coyote sightings records from almost the same time period. And you can see these stark differences despite a pretty similar number of points. So for iNat, they're really clustered in the green spaces. People typically go into the green spaces to log biodiversity in those apps. But with SFACC's data, the sightings are spread out across the city because people are going to report conflict concerns or unusual sightings downtown and that kind of thing. So that's not to throw shade at iNaturalist. It's just to remind you that the purpose of the data set really matters for interpreting and drawing conclusions from that data set. And so using these community science data sets together is really, really important. So what did we find from the past decade of SFACC coyote reports? First, something that's important to note is that we can only assess conflict in relation to the total number of coyote reports that we get. So we assessed almost everything as a ratio. With that in mind, we saw that the proportion of reports constituting conflict was increasing a little bit over the past 5 years. But across 3,900 unique coyote sightings records, only 15% of the records were conflict, while about 65% were confirmed non-conflicts. And the rest of the reports are classified as unknown since they had no comments. And you can also see from this animation that there are disparities in where and how people are experiencing and or reporting coyote interactions, with very little in the eastern part of the city, for example. It doesn't mean they're not there. And the number one thing we found was that conflict reports were strongly linked to dog presence. As you heard about in your quiz, nearly 80% of conflict reports involved dogs. So I really want y'all to take that home. And being off-leash versus on-leash mattered. That's the most important part. So in conflict reports involving dogs, those dogs were more than twice as likely to be off-leash than in non-conflict reports involving dogs. Then knowing when conflict occurs, so a seasonality of conflict, can really help prepare communities for targeted prevention and mitigation. For example, conflict reports increased in the pup rearing season, late spring and early summer, which I already taught you. And that's when coyotes might be escorting people away from their dens to protect their puppies, just like you or I might for our kids, right? But that could be scary for folks. It can also sometimes escalate. And as another example, conflict reports also increased during the dry season, which is when coyotes could have access to fewer resources, and we might see more reports, for example, of coyotes digging up people's irrigation, which is something that happens kind of for water, kind of for play. And I'm happy to talk more about that afterward if you're interested. We also wanted to see if we could predict the spatial distribution of conflict reports in relation to non-conflicts. And we used a number of different spatial features. First, vegetation greenness as a proxy for natural habitat availability. We looked at parks, we looked at housing density, which could predict attractants like this poor kitty right here. We also looked at pollution burden, which is a freely available index from a CalEnviroscreen that combines 13 different pollution metrics, and human population vulnerability, which is also from CalEnviroscreen and, among other things, can be indicative of bias in reporting and also serve as a proxy for fewer municipal services to clean up attractants like trash. So these maps, don't worry about reading legends. They show some of the key spatial predictors, and I'll explain it. So the darker areas are associated with more vulnerable locations like lower median income, higher housing density, higher pollution burden, and higher percentile of human vulnerability characteristics. And the key thing to note here is that none of our geospatial features were highly correlated with one another in this city, which is kind of unusual for urban areas. And that means that each of those covariates offers unique insight. So I'll spare you the charts and graphs and give you the point. While most conflicts took place within parks, conflict records outside of parks were predicted by higher median income and higher vegetation greenness. Why might this be? We have lots of ideas about what it might be. So it could be because coyotes might be more common in wealthier neighborhoods, again, linked to the luxury effect, maybe higher quality habitat in wealthier areas. And or people in wealthier neighborhoods have the time and the access to report their experiences, which is a really key component. The types of anthropogenic attractants for urban wildlife might also differ across income levels, thereby influencing interactions. So for instance, I might feed feral cats, don't feed feral cats, at my house if I have a house, right? Otherwise, I'm not going to feed them at my house. I don't have a house. Or I might not have adequate municipal services near my home in a lower income area, which could bring in certain things that coyotes like to eat. So we've also learned that it's key to improve equity in access to this reporting platform across the city, since we're seeing a gap in reports from the less advantaged regions of the city. It doesn't mean that people aren't interacting with coyotes. And lastly, we did a ton of work on conflict and attitudes, kind of picking through all the attitudes and qualitative comments. And I just want to show you this one key example. So on the left is a map of hotspots and cold spots of conflict reports with coyotes. And on the right is a map of hotspots and cold spots of people expressing concern or sort of these negative attitudes toward coyotes. And you can see that just visually, they don't always line up. And in fact, we had a good number of comments across that decade that said something like, my dog was chased by a coyote. It was really scary, but I also recognized I had my dog off leash in an on leash area and there were coyote signs and I made a mistake, that kind of thing. So people kind of being freaked out by the conflict, but then also recognizing sort of the ecosystem aspect as well, and wanting and recognizing that they need to take some of that on. And so I think that really points to what coexistence is all about, right? You can never get rid of every single conflict instance with coyotes or with any other animal, but we can provide communities with the tools and resources and knowledge to be able to prevent and mitigate conflicts, to really feel like they're empowered to do that and know that there are some sort of risks out there on the landscape that they can kind of navigate with these tools. So from this work, we've been doing a ton of outreach via radio, presentations, and even within the California Academy of Sciences' amazing California State of Nature exhibit. And we created a website, check it out, called Bay Area Coyote, that brings together historically siloed researchers, managers, and institutions working on coyote coexistence. There are a ton of these real-time coyote management response efforts going on all the time in the Bay Area across a lot of agencies and organizations that I don't think we hear about enough. So check that out. Now, I've talked a lot about cities so far today, but can't forget that California's rural ranching communities face challenges from coyotes too, especially sheep losses and calf losses to coyotes. And these losses can be frustrating or even devastating in some cases. Now, fortunately, there are a lot of folks out there working on non-lethal solutions to preventing predation on livestock in California and beyond. For instance, livestock guardian animals are a fantastic option. Not just various breeds of dogs, but also even llamas. Believe it or not, guard llamas exist, and these animals can bond to livestock and protect them. And whether and when you use livestock guardian animals depends on the biological and ecological context. But from the evidence we have so far, livestock guardian animals are very successful. And I wanted to include this screenshot from a 2012 SF-Gate article, which talks about the effectiveness of livestock guardian animals and describes a cost-sharing program that was implemented in Marin County at the time to help ranchers more easily access these non-lethal options. And these types of cost-sharing programs can be really critical for getting these solutions on the ground in a more equitable way. So I hope that we can have more of them. Another example of non-lethal solutions in ranching communities is fladry, which, as you can see, are these wires with flags hung from them that can scare off predator species. Or turbofladry, which is electrified, kind of the same thing, just electric. It's been shown to be even more effective for deterring coyotes, according to at least 1 or 2 studies. Now, the jury's still out on whether, if, and when predatory animals might habituate to fladry, but there are a lot of ongoing studies on that front. So those are just a couple of examples of tools, and we'll get into more soon, but every solution won't be useful in every context. It's really important to engage with and work alongside ranchers and other community members to understand their unique contexts when trying to help with solutions. So for example, Tammy Lim over at East Bay Regional Park District leads a quarterly Bay Area coyote work group that I'm a part of. And some of y'all might know this, but East Bay Regional Park District leases out parts of their land to cattle ranchers. So a group of us went out this spring to try and troubleshoot issues that one of the ranchers was having with coyotes killing calves. And some solutions out there, like the guardian dogs, wouldn't work for him because he only leases the land seasonally and not year-round. And the cows and water sources on the land are so spread out that fencing or fladry aren't really viable options. This rancher just wanted to be able to shoot the coyotes, but that wasn't really a viable option in this context either. So by spending some time and listening to one another and paying attention to the rancher's needs and wants, we were actually able to get just a little bit closer to reaching common ground about potentially experimenting with alternative non-lethal tools. So this is just to show you, just for coexistence, taking the time to understand each other is just as important as understanding the wildlife. So across rural to urban landscapes, there's a lot we can do to try and coexist successfully with coyotes, since clearly they are not going anywhere. So let's do a rundown, as promised, of coexistence strategies. And this is going to be a non-exhaustive list of coexistence strategies. So coexistence strategy number 1, keep pets and livestock safe. So how can we do this? First, keep dogs on leash in on-leash areas. This is low-key just an excuse for me to put a picture of my adorable dog on the slide. I love him. His name's River. Anyway, in off-leash areas, make sure your dog is under voice command and has good recall. Keep those dogs on leash as much as possible. You might also consider in parks where you know there might be dens and it's pup rearing season, because now you know when pup rearing season is, you might consider just keeping your dog on leash to be proactive about that kind of thing and avoid any issues. Second, keep your pets and livestock secured and well attended. For instance, don't let your cats roam outdoors. I know it's tempting, but there are so many awesome options out there like catios or leashes that will work just as well for getting cats that enrichment that you want them to have. Think about getting coyote rollers for your backyard fence so that coyotes can't get in. So coyotes have been known to scale fences up to 6 or even 8 feet tall. And if you're wondering what a coyote roller is, I am so pleased to be the one to tell you, because they are sort of amusing. So here's a video from the coyote roller folks. This is a husky trying to get out of a yard. And the husky cannot make it because these are essentially these metal tubes that go across the top of the fence. And the coyote or cat or dog or whatever you're trying to keep in or out will try to gain purchase on the top, and it just rolls right off. So it doesn't work out for them. And I hear they're really useful. For folks with livestock, husbandry is key for preventing conflict. Coyotes can dig and jump. So for small herds or poultry, make sure that those animals are in fully enclosed, coyote-proof enclosures at night. Think about trying electronet fencing, which is shown here, or fladry in strategic areas or seasons for larger operations. And of course, livestock guardian animals might work for your context. And there are many other options online. Happy to point you in those directions. And I just had to include this one just for fun. If you have a cat or a smaller dog and you want to help them become the punk rocker they always dreamed of being, try out one of these coyote deterrent spiky vests. Full disclaimer, we have absolutely no idea whether and to what extent they're effective, because that research study would have a lot of ethical issues. But if I were a coyote, I sure as heck wouldn't be going anywhere near that nonsense, would you? Okay, coexistence strategy number 2, pay attention to the signage. I cannot stress this enough. A lot of management agencies and organizations put out signage to help you remember coyotes are around and alert you to active den sites, especially in urban areas, but also in rural parks. So humans, we kind of suck. We grow sign blind really easily. Try to change that. Be aware. Read the signs. They are there for a reason. Coexistence strategy number 3, secure attractants. Make sure your trash and compost are secured. Pick up fallen fruit in your yard. Don't leave food out on the ground for feral cats. You know who you are. And for folks who own livestock, dead livestock, after birth, etc., can serve as these really powerful attractants for coyotes and other predators. You have to figure out a way to move these to a secure location, maybe protected by electric fencing, for example, if you have access to it. Strategy number 4, I cannot say this enough. Do not feed wildlife. It is illegal in California. You may have heard about this woman a few years ago who was feeding coyotes in San Francisco, and she is not the only one. Just like with dogs, if we give coyotes rewards, they will want to approach us for more rewards. Coyotes have plenty to eat, and feeding them puts us in danger while ensuring the coyote's demise, like poor Carl I told you about earlier. Remember, a fed coyote is a dead coyote. And finally, coexistence strategy number 5, learn when and how to properly haze a coyote. We need to train coyotes we live with, train them, to maintain their natural wariness of us. And the most important things to remember for hazing are that first, you should only do it if you're being actively approached by a coyote. But there's a caveat. During pup rearing season, coyotes are going to sometimes guide people away from their dens to protect their puppies. Remember, they're going to escort, which is a reasonable, natural behavior. I know that can be a little bit scary though. So try to be aware of whether it's pup rearing season, whether there might be a den nearby, stay away. If there's a known den nearby and a coyote is kind of escorting you away, or if you're uncomfortable or unable to haze, it's okay to maintain your distance by calmly leaving the area while maintaining eye contact with the animal. Otherwise, if you're being actively approached, you should act big and loud. So you got to say things like, go away, coyote, go away, be loud, don't be shy. Go ahead right now, try this at home if you want. You can't be shy when you're doing this. You got to be assertive. You got to get weird, okay? You need to be persistent. You need to do this until the coyote leaves the immediate area. And you can use tools if you have them, like the Presidio Trust staff are demonstrating in this fantastic video tutorial, very delightful tools, umbrella and plastic bag. Some people swear by cans of coins, whatever. If you happen to have things around to help you with the hazing, that will not harm the coyote. Okay, before wrapping it up, I promised my colleagues at Post that I would do some more myth busting, since there are so many misconceptions floating around about coyotes and their management. So let's go. First myth, coyotes are getting more aggressive and conflict is increasing. Okay, let's dig into this a little bit. So the San Francisco Chronicle published an article last October saying that coyote reports increased substantially from the year before, and that it's a bad sign and we need to, quote, do something about it. But this article is honestly sensationalizing this issue, since coyote reports are not necessarily conflict reports. And people always ask me whether conflict with coyotes is increasing, but that's a nearly impossible question to answer. Let me tell you why. Here, we can take a lesson from epidemiology. You didn't expect me to go in that direction, I know it. So in epidemiology, what we really would love to have for every disease is what's called the infinite fatality ratio. Of all the cases of people having this disease ever, how many of them actually died? What's the proportion of people that died from this disease? What's the mortality rate? Now, it's really impossible to get that kind of information because people aren't necessarily going to the doctor for everything, reporting that they have these cases. We got a little bit close to infinite fatality ratio for COVID because everyone was studying it, but really, we more often are looking at the case fatality ratio. So all the reported and logged cases of a disease, how many of them were mortalities? And that's exactly what the case is for coyote conflict. We need people to report as many sightings as possible, even uneventful sightings, so that we can compare the conflicts to these kind of neutral reports. Now, going back to this Chronicle article, on that note, our San Francisco coyote conflict paper I described to you was published and had tons of media around it in late 2023. It's likely that all of that media actually pushed more people to know how to report their sightings. And we've been telling people that we want all of these neutral sightings. So that really kind of boosted the reports, and that's probably what the Chronicle is picking up on. So in short, there's really not enough evidence to say whether conflict is increasing, and we actually need your help by reporting your sightings as much as possible. Myth number 2, coyotes shouldn't be active during the day. Okay, we went over this in our quiz. A lot of folks get worried and think something is wrong when they see a coyote during the day, but coyotes are naturally cathemeral, which means they can be flexible about whether they're active day or night. So as long as they're not actively approaching people or showing other alarming signs, they're just doing their thing. Okay, myth number 3, we can lethally remove coyotes or relocate them and that will solve all of our problems. Nope. Okay, first, relocating coyotes is not allowed in California. It's also unethical. Remember, coyotes are highly territorial. Dropping one into another coyote's territory will not be kind to them. It's also impractical. Catching one coyote is difficult enough. So how are you about to catch all of them and move them somewhere, please? Second, relocation or lethal control just won't work in the long run. The best evidence we have so far shows us that even in coyote populations that are reduced a whopping 75%, it takes less than a year for those populations to rebound. This is because of a combination of litter sizes increasing and new breeding pairs moving in to take the previous territories. These are called compensatory reproduction and compensatory immigration. Trying to lethally control coyotes is like trying to fight the mythical hydra whose heads keep growing back when you chop them off. It's overall likely to be a huge waste of time, money, and energy, and potentially even make things worse than if we had just assured our resident coyote packs are properly, quote unquote, trained. Myth number 4, coyotes intentionally play with dogs to lure dogs to their deaths. False. You have to remember, coyotes are canids too. So they have the same innate curiosity and desire to play, as you can see. Now, they also do have a prey drive, of course. And even if they're showing playful behaviors, this prey drive could get triggered at some point. But they're not just sitting there twiddling their metaphorical thumbs, they don't have thumbs, making an active decision about when to kick that prey drive into gear while playing. Myth number 5. Okay, this is less of a myth than a question I get a lot. Why won't the authorities help coyotes that have mange? Well, it's tricky. And it can be stressful or even cause more harm than good. For example, ivermectin works on mange, but needs to be delivered in 2 doses, weeks apart. You risk poisoning an animal, getting the wrong animal and poisoning that one if you don't get the right coyote. Bravecto is another example. That requires a prescription. It's still a bit challenging to administer successfully. And there's some evidence out there that it can have these broader, lasting negative ecological impacts far beyond coyotes. So not great. As far as trapping a coyote, bringing it in for treatment, that's also tricky because they're so clever and it can be really stressful for a coyote that's already weak from mange. So if any of you, I know you people, you're so kind and you care about wildlife, and I also feel very sad when I see a mangy coyote, but we really cannot do anything to them or for them usually. So if you know of anyone out there trying to secretly be a do-gooder in this realm, remind them that it is California law that it's illegal to harass, feed, or disrupt the behavior of wildlife in California. Myth number 6, coyotes don't serve any meaningful ecological purpose. Okay, that's just throwing unnecessary shade, folks. Come on now. Along with being the top predator in many urban ecosystems, coyotes are also helping us out. Now, I don't like to call anything a pest. One man's pest is another man's treasure, as I like to say. But coyotes are regulating our rodent populations, eating lots of rats and mice that people tend to consider pests. It's even possible that they could be regulating disease by eating rodents, but the science doesn't have an answer on that yet. Lastly, myth number 7, we're going to be overrun by coyotes as their populations keep increasing indefinitely. Well, actually, coyotes are highly territorial. There's only one breeding pair per pack. So basically, rather than just increasing indefinitely, coyotes' territoriality means there's an automatic cap on their density within any given location. So nobody else can come in. But then I hear folks saying, oh, but I've been hearing enormous packs of vicious coyotes. It sounds like tons of them all at once. Well, coyotes are highly vocal. They can make at least 11 different sounds, including yips, howls, barks, and more, all to communicate with one another. Let's listen to this brief audio my friend Elena recorded near Mount Davidson the other night. Try to estimate how many coyotes you're hearing, and feel free to put that in the chat. Okay, so I can't tell you how many there are for sure, but it could be even as few as 3 or 4 that you're hearing. Sounded like a lot more, right? They are just fantastic singers, maybe even with better range than some of the pop stars out there these days. So I gave you a very non-exhaustive list of all the myths. There's one more important bit before we finish. I wanted to shout out the plethora of coyote research and management happening in the Bay Area these days and tell you how you can get involved. So who's who in the Bay Area coyote world? I am not going to bore you with the list because there are a buttload of agencies, organizations, institutions, and individual people involved. I actually tried to list out all the individuals involved that I could think of on this slide, but it was so long it wouldn't fit. More than 30 people for sure. So please visit bayareacoyote.org to learn more about the fantastic folks working on coyotes in the region. And which way from here? Well, we want to make that list of folks even longer. We need you to help with research and coexistence. The more community scientists reporting their coyote sightings and experiences, the better. We're also beginning efforts to advocate for legislation to support a permanently funded statewide human-wildlife conflict program for everybody to benefit from. And we'll soon be starting a Bay Area-wide campaign against wildlife feeding. If you want to join us in any of those efforts, please feel free to reach out. And with that, I will finally end this talk. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Yay! Thank you so much, Dr. Christine. Chat, can we show some love for our speaker tonight? Shout out if you learned something new about coyotes. And thank you so much for being patient while we fix the chat. Go ahead and share the love, Dr. Christine. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. We have a reminder to our live audience, if you want to ask a question, now is your time. I'm going to be looking at the chat to pick out some questions and go from there. Here are some ones that came earlier. So, you know, our audience, we've got a lot of concerned pet owners out there. And I know you shared some coexistence strategies, but we have some specific questions about, like, if you could just walk us through real quickly, one more time, keep it straight. You know, what do we see when we're walking with our dog? And if there's a group of dogs that you're hiking with, will a coyote, you know, what can we expect behaviors? And, you know, are they going to snatch this small dog on leash right next to us? Give us a little quell our worries for our audience here about pets.
All right. So I'm going to try to give you some answers, and also with the caveat, the asterisk, that remember when I said coyotes are behaviorally flexible, that means that no matter what I tell you, you can never 100% predict what an individual coyote is going to do because they have a personality, but you can predict the trends of what might help. So we know that having our dogs on leash in areas where there are coyotes is really important, especially during sensitive times like pup rearing season, where those coyotes are going to be even more likely to view dogs as a threat, essentially, to their puppies. You want to have those dogs on leash. You can do hazing when you have your dog. If you have a coyote that's approaching you actively, there is a type of hazing you can do where you're still holding onto your dog securely. I recommend checking out the Presidio Trust's hazing video to show you specifically what you do with the dog on leash and how you can use one arm, and, you know, don't advance toward the coyote and try to leave that area while keeping eye contact as well. Will a coyote snatch? Oh, if you're walking through a space with a lot of dogs, will coyotes give you wide berth? It's likely. It probably depends on a good number of things. I'm sorry to give you the it depends answer, but it probably depends on whether it's pup rearing season primarily, right? If those dogs are walking near a den, that I'm sure that a coyote would fiercely defend the den, or a pack of coyotes even. Depends on if it's a large pack of coyotes. You know, do they feel anxious about the dogs or not? Are they in a large group or not? And it also sort of depends on, I think, the size of the dog's behavior as well. And then, will a coyote snatch a little dog off a leash next to you? Usually, coyotes maintain a natural wariness of us, but there have been instances of that happening. It's super rare. And it's usually when the coyotes have been obviously showing signs of habituation for a minute before they actually would end up making contact with a little dog on leash next to you. So pay attention to what's going on around you, what you hear about in your neighborhoods.
Thank you. I know you mentioned make yourself big and loud. We had a question from a viewer here about if flashing light collars work to scare coyotes.
Yeah, I think there's been at least one study where they did put flashing lights on cow collars. I don't know if they've done it for dogs. So I think that all the studies, the predator studies using flashing lights, come up against this question of when do they habituate, right? Like, when do coyotes get wise to the fact that the lights really don't mean anything? And having sort of a toolkit, a suite of tools together, like the lights and aversive conditioning, like, hazing and being loud, and adding these different things together to associate with those lights could be helpful. If you have sort of a stationary area where you're thinking of putting lights up, maybe alternating those lights and including audio has been shown to be more effective. Putting lights on collars, I think could, if a coyote's not severely habituated, I think it would freak them out. Anything sort of novel freaks a coyote out, at least a little bit if they're not habituated. But we're not really sure. The jury's out on when and how they habituate to these types of tools.
On the same thread of deterrence, what about, we got a question about dog whistles. What about hiking poles? Sorry, I just posted hiking poles. Here we go. And then there's a question here about deterring coyotes from irrigation on farms. This person works with farmers.
Yeah, so audio things like whistles and shaking cans, and sometimes people even are like using like air horns or something that's kind of aggressive. Like from everything that I've heard anecdotal, again, I'm not sure if these things have been studied enough empirically, but anecdotally, depending on the coyote and whether they have heard these things before, they'd definitely be a little bit freaked out by something new like that or loud, or it would annoy them enough for you to be able to make a different decision or go in another direction. I think, unless they've heard a lot of whistles a lot of the time. If you have your dog with you, your dog might get annoyed by the whistle too and stressed out. So something to consider. Hiking poles. I suppose it as a last ditch thing to just like keep a coyote at a distance. If you've gotten to that point, hopefully you never have to get to that point, but you cannot just, I would advise against them because I don't know if you're in a dire situation, you might have the desire to do something negative to the coyote with those poles. And that is illegal. It's illegal to harass wildlife. So if you're using them to kind of just make you feel more secure, that's fine. But don't hit a coyote. Irrigation. So I've been reading up on irrigation because I also have been getting this question a bit. So it's not just for water, just so you know. It's also, there's been a lot of farmers saying that they see puppies chewing on the irrigation lines to teethe, like to play and to teethe. And so it could also just be for play and for boredom. So some folks have said that they will actually not just put sort of like hardware cloth on their poles and spend the money, right? Instead of like, spending more money down the road by like taking care of all the damage, you protect your irrigation lines using hardware cloth or some other material. But they'll also maybe even put out like pieces of pipe or something for the coyote pups in their area to chew on instead of being tempted to chew on the lines. So try out things like that.
Great. And so, we know that coyotes are a divisive topic, and I love the post community here trying to help change that. So this person asks, like, how do you recommend talking to someone who's closed-minded, and how would you go about changing someone's minds? Is it even worth it? This person asked they're seeing frustrated opinions on Nextdoor. Do you even engage? Like, what's your take? How can we turn our supporters into more active supporters?
Yeah, something I hinted at is that almost every human-wildlife conflict around the world is based in human-human conflicts and disagreements. And building relationships with your fellow people and community members can be really important. So not just coming to someone and being like, you need to do this, right? Like nobody listens to that. You wouldn't either. It's more about building those relationships, talking to folks, and then going from there and providing that education. Talking also, like, you can use education, you can use the empathetic sort of angle. I think it's useful to have a lot of different angles. Like, I like to say it's actually a waste of our money and time to lethally remove a coyote, or get those permits where you can have someone come trap a coyote on your land, because they're going to come back. So if your coyote isn't already habituated, like, how can you work on training it so you're not spending all this time and energy removing things that will come back and plague you nonetheless? So you can use a combination of different approaches, but it's all about relationship building and empathy too.
I love that. We have a viewer who, you touched a lot about urban city, especially in San Francisco. Do you think coyote reporting on the websites you shared from Santa Cruz County would be helpful?
Yeah, I could definitely branch out our survey to be for Santa Cruz County. I was trying to, there's no real reason why I didn't. So we can definitely branch that out to Santa Cruz County. That'd be really helpful. You can also right away start using iNaturalist to just log your sightings, and you can put a couple of notes in your sightings if something interesting has happened, and we'll look at those as well when we're doing studies like these.
Okay, digging into the science here in our last few minutes. someone who is interested in hearing, they talked about hearing coyotes at night. Is there an explanation about why they're so loud together and why they only hear howling at night?
Yeah, well, it probably sort of depends where you live, but yeah, most of the time it's only at night. And that howling and yipping, and I remember, remember that I told you there are 11 different sounds at least that coyotes can make. And those sounds are everything from, communicating socially, finding each other, like just really saying like, what's up, like, and like kind of playing off each other in that way, to, foraging opportunities, to territorial defense. Those howling sounds are not so much territorial defense. They're like kind of lower growly sounds that you'll hear, and barks when they're defending their territory, but they're social. It's just like, we have conversations amongst ourselves about what to eat and where and how people are doing, and greeting folks who have been out during the day and whatever, because we're a family, right? So that's kind of how coyotes are talking to each other.
Okay, question here. Thank you. Do coyotes have natural predators? And a question here about, could you touch on the theory that coyotes view cats and dogs more as competitors or threats than prey?
Interesting. Yeah, so coyotes are both, there have been cases of bears, wolves, even I think some eagles maybe, and I'm not sure about mountain lions, preying on coyotes, maybe scavenging, maybe preying. I don't really know if anyone's done an in-depth study on that. It's not very common. They are also, of course, competitors with those larger predators. And then, of course, people, number one threat to coyotes through shooting them or accidentally killing them. And then cats as competitors versus prey items. I actually haven't heard that before. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, in places where there are large amounts of feral cats, that the cats are out there eating the same rodents that the coyotes want to have access to. But coyotes can pretty easily eat. I mean, cats can be formidable depending on the personality of the cat. But while it's not like a super common thing for coyotes to eat cats, it's not uncommon either. It's a totally fair prey item for them to have.
All right. Last question here. I think is really interesting. This person is curious. How did you become a carnivore ecologist? The trend is usually towards specialty, not a generalist like coyotes.
Yeah, I actually, I guess, got my start when I was studying natural resources in my undergrad at Cornell, like applied ecology. And I was really keen on wildlife only, right? I really wanted to learn more about wildlife. I didn't care which ones. And then I started to learn more about issues people were facing with conflicts with wildlife. And of course, carnivores are just one subset of wildlife people face conflicts with. There's also things like elephants and so on. But I somehow ended up falling more and more into carnivore. I worked on chimpanzees and other primates and that kind of thing as in regard to conflict. But I ended up kind of getting drawn into, I work in Kenya a lot, getting drawn into spotted hyenas, for instance, which are another really behaviorally flexible animal that's really, really misunderstood. Maybe the same opinions negatively about them as for coyotes here. And I found that really fascinating, the volatility of that species, and realized, like, actually, I've been sort of attracted to working with volatile, misunderstood, controversial species from the jump. I've worked on gulls, I've worked with pigeons, I've worked with snakes a little bit. So coyotes are just another version of that.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Christine, for your knowledge and for your time. And thank you, chat, for your energy and your questions. We could keep going, but we've taken so much of Dr. Christine's time. I'm so grateful for you being here. Chat, can we just show so much more love to Dr. Christine for sharing? And yeah, what we've learned here is coyotes can be really unpredictable, but you've given us so many tools and strategies for keeping ourselves, our pets, and our family members safe. And so let's just approach coyotes with caution, give them their space, and don't feed wildlife. Dr. Christine, before we say goodbye, any last words you want to say to our audience?
Yes, I will be like a broken record and point you toward bayareacoyote.org to find out what all of these awesome folks are up to across the Bay. I am one of many. It takes a village. We want you to join us as a community scientist at the very least. And if you're keen, you can also check me out on the socials. I'm Christine Eleanor on Instagram, Scrappy Naturalist on TikTok. Hope to see you there.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Christine. Let's take a quick picture so I can take a screenshot later. 3, 2, 1. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Christine. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. But wait, chat, don't go anywhere. Thank you so much for making it to the end. I just want to put you on to some of the upcoming events that we have that are free for the community. So if you want to learn more about the Coyote Valley and you just learned about the namesake of this place, come explore Coyote Valley on bike with us. Take the 17-mile group ride on Saturday, September 13th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. We'll take you on a tour, teach you about the natural landscapes, about the species that call it home, and you must bring your own bike and helmet, and it's all free. It's going to be a great time. So register by clicking the link in the chat or scanning that QR code. Next event is one of my favorites. It's called the Representation Matters Film Festival, happening on Saturday, September 27th from 6 to 9 p.m. at Devil's Canyon Brewery in San Carlos. We're featuring 8 films that feature diverse voices of adventure to showcase what it means to what nature connects us all and how we're all connected. And it's outdoors, it's free entry, free pizza for those who come, and it's a wonderful community event. Please come on Saturday, September 27th. Check the link out in the chat or scan that QR code. And last but not least, we host free events every single month. That's hikes, walks, in-person events, more online events like this, and volunteer work days. So check out openspacetrust.org/events to learn more, as well as our free field guides if you want to know where to go hiking in the Bay Area. Make sure you follow us on social media to never miss an event or update. And last but not least, thank you for making it to the very end. If you like this webinar, please let us know what you thought about it so we can continue to create and improve quality content for you every single time. Once again, my name is Megan Nguyen. It's been a pleasure to be your host for tonight, and I'll hope to see you next time. Thank you. Fill out that survey.